Hey guys, welcome to week 1. This video is simply just going to be me reading the story to you and me stopping periodically throughout the story, explaining it to you, kind of clearing up some things. So I'm trying to keep it as if we were in the classroom, and also too, if you have any questions, you can refer back to the video as many times as you need to. Okay, so this week's short story is called The Story of an Hour. It is a very good story. I have thoroughly enjoyed reading it myself. It is by Kate Chopin, and it was written in the 1800s, and it actually appeared in Vogue magazine, I think in 1894. So it's a pretty old story, but it is such a good one. So here we go. If you want to follow along on the PDF that's on Schoology, you can do so, or if you just want to sit and listen as I read, that's fine as well. Alright. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. It was her sister Josephine who told her, in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed and half concealing. Her husband's friend Richards was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. Okay, so we are right away introduced to Mrs. Mallard. We know that she has a heart condition, and we know now that her husband has died in a very tragic railroad accident. So we are already right into the meat of the story. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once with sudden, wild abandonment in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. She could see in the open square before her house the tops of trees that were all aquiver with the new spring life. The delicious breath of rain was in the air. In the street below, a peddler was crying his wares. The notes of a distant song which someone was singing reached her faintly, and countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. There were patches of blue sky showing here and there through the clouds that had met and piled one above the other in the west facing her window. She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, except when a sob came up into her throat and shook her, as a child who has cried itself to sleep continues to sob in its dreams. She was young, with a fair, calm face, whose lines bespoke repression and even a certain strength. But now there was a dull stare in her eyes, whose gaze was fixed away off yonder on one of those patches of blue sky. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it, fearfully. What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name. But she felt it, creeping out of the sky, reaching toward her through the sounds, the scents, the color that filled the air. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her, and she was striving to beat it back with her will, as powerless as her two white slender hands would have been. When she abandoned herself a little, whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over under her breath. Free, free, free. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright. Her pulses beat fast, and the coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that had never looked save with love upon her, fixed and gray and dead. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely, and she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. Okay, and I'm going to pause right there for just a couple of minutes and kind of go back and explain what we just looked at. Okay, so her husband has died in this horrific railroad accident, and this section here that I just read, we are seeing a huge amount of different types of emotions going on. From the beginning, it mentions that she wept all of a sudden with like this wild abandonment. So we know she is very distraught, very, very upset with the fact of her husband's death. So she goes up to her room alone, and then while she's in her room, she kind of has this motionless, robotic stare about her. She is looking out the window. She's sitting there just looking at the town below her, and every now and then, she would start sobbing and start crying again. But for the most part, she would just kind of stare and look out her window and just fix her gaze on this one particular part of the sky. And as she was doing this, then she begins to have another thought come to her mind. She really didn't know, honestly, what it was at first, but then she kind of starts pondering on it a little bit more, and she was even trying to kind of, what did it say? She was trying to beat it back, like she knew she didn't want to have this thought, but she was having it anyway. She whispered some particular words, or one in particular word. She started whispering free. Now you kind of have to think about the time period that we're looking in. This is the 1800s. Women are not considered equal to their spouses. So she wasn't a very independent woman. She didn't have a lot of say-so. And at this moment, she's beginning to realize, of course, she's a widow, but now she's becoming an independent woman where she could possibly have a say-so about her life and the things that she is going to start doing. And we can kind of see that she has a powerless kind of role, because she says, she was trying to beat that feeling back with her will, as powerless as her two white, slender hands would have been. So that does give us an indication that she didn't have much say-so. Kind of whatever her husband said, it went. So she couldn't really voice her own opinion. But now she's realizing she doesn't have to worry about that anymore. Of course, she knew that when she saw her husband dead, and she was going to start crying again, because he was gentle with her. It said that he had tender hands, so he probably was a very gentlemanly man, and he looked at her with a love. Okay, so we knew that he cared about her and she cared about him. But she was beginning now to spread her arms out and welcome the fact that she was going to now be making her own decisions and kind of be an independent woman. There would be no one to live for her during those coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. A kind intention or a cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. And yet she had loved him, sometimes. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in the face of this possession of self-assertion which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? Free, body and soul free, she kept whispering. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring for admission. "Louise, open the door. I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. "What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sake, open the door." "Go away. I am not making myself ill." No, she was drinking in a very elixir of life through that open window. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her, spring days and summer days, and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. She arose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. She clasped her sister's waist, and together they descended the stairs. Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom. Okay, I'm going to stop right there again for just a moment. Again, kind of reiterating the fact, she feels like that men and women oppress each other. She says back up in a couple of paragraphs, there would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. So she kind of recognizes that she knows men try to control women. Women are trying to kind of put in their say-so, trying to take control of things, but are not allowed to, even if they are trying to do that in a kind way, or even in a hateful way. It doesn't matter. She says it's no less a crime. So she's really kind of realizing the role of women at this particular time. And of course, again, she is very saddened that her husband has passed. She does mention that she loved him sometimes, and often she did not. But that didn't matter anymore. She did care about her husband. Of course, there were times where she was probably wondering what in the world is going on. But she's still whispering the fact that she's free, body and soul. She is now free. And she comes out of the room, and it says, she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. So she was really embracing the fact that even though she was a widow, she was now her own independent woman, and she had a new strength about her that she didn't have before. And it was very interesting because the previous sentence said that she breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. So she now was hoping that she will get to embrace all of the things that she is dreaming about. She's dreaming about the spring days, the summer days that are ahead of her, and she's wanting her life to be carried out into those days so she can experience that independent strength that she now has. And the next sentence says that it was only yesterday she had thought that with a shudder that life might be long. So before she found out of the news of her husband's death, she was probably thinking like, oh my goodness, like I'm having to live this particular life in kind of a controlling situation where I don't have a say-so. And she didn't like that particular thought. Okay, so at one time she was wishing that, why does this have to continue on? But now the next minute she's like, okay, it is sad that my husband has passed, but I have a newfound independence and a newfound strength. And she was very much looking forward to that. Okay, someone was opening the front door with a latchkey. It was Brentley Mallard who entered, a little travel-stained, composedly carrying his gripsack and umbrella. He had been far from the scene of the accident, and did not even know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife. But Richard's was too late. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, of joy that kills. The end. Okay, so I know some of you are probably kind of confused as to what has just happened. Let me explain. Okay, so they were going downstairs, and then all of a sudden, Brentley, who is Louise's wife, Mrs. Mallard, he came in the front door. He had not known that there was even an accident that had happened. He was far away from the accident. So when he came in, Josephine, who is the sister, she screamed. And Richards, the friend, wanted to kind of protect Louise, the one with the heart condition. he wanted to try to protect her from seeing her husband, Brentley, just so she wouldn't be in such shock. But Josephine screamed, and Louise, okay, she was so excited that her husband was alive that she actually caused her own heart attack, which is kind of strange, I know, plot twist, but that's kind of the irony here, which I love. We think that, she's going to have a heart attack from, the sadness and the angst that she has from the death of her husband, but instead, when we find out he's alive, she actually dies of being super happy. Plot twist, irony, I absolutely love it. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this story. I hope I explained it as best as I hope I explained it as best as I could to you. If you still have some questions, obviously, please let me know, and I will do my best to explain them to you. But I hope you enjoyed it. It was one of my favorites. You have questions to complete with this. If you have any questions on those, just let me know, and I will be talking to you guys soon. See ya.